Hi, and welcome to the Church Builder Podcast with Pastor Dale O'Shields. My name is Steve Rivera, here with Jody Early. We're part of the team here at Church of the Redeemer. And today we're interviewing Pastor Dale O'Shields here, talking about managing and leading. Welcome, everyone.
Hello, hello.
Great to be here today. A great topic to talk about, managing versus leading.
Yeah, you know, this word leadership and leading is kind of everywhere these days. And so today we just want to take some time and unpack really the differences between managing and leading and the value of both of them, really. And so as we get started, Pastor Dale, you've been in ministry many years, have a lot of experience with both of these. And so would you open us up and just kind of begin the topic and the conversation on managing and leading?
Yeah, as you said, managing and leading are two very important sort of parallel skills and abilities, and actually giftings at some level. And leadership really, I think, is all about moving something forward. You're talking about being a leader. You're talking about taking somebody or something somewhere and moving them toward an objective, pursuing something, accomplishing something. Whereas management is all about sort of maintaining the status quo or maintaining the systems and the processes that undergird things that are occurring as we move forward. And so both are essential, both are vital. I think what can happen many times is that sometimes leaders who need to move things forward get bogged down in management. And so when a leader gets bogged down in management, what happens is the organization ceases to move forward. And so that's where the delicate balance becomes. Both are needed, both are essential, but we have to know what role we're called to be in and then how to best function in that role.
That's great. You know, I think about managers and leaders, and sometimes the tendency is to place one over the other. Would you say like one is higher than the other, or?
I think both are essential. I do think that if we're going to err on one side, it's always better to err on the side of leadership, because again, even as a manager, you want to make sure that you're always not just stuck in the status quo, but you're making sure that you're creating processes and systems that are moving forward with the organization. But both are essential. If you don't manage well, you're not going to have anything to lead. It's an important thing to realize. And so a good leader is wise to have good management skills himself, herself, but also to make sure that there are people in the organization that are helping maintain that level of status quo so that there's a solidity, a sense of stability to the organization.
That's great. I mean, they're both needed, but I like what you said, like leaning more towards the leadership side. Maybe speak to helping either to self-identify or helping someone else. If you're leading someone else, helping them to identify that they haven't yet moved, they're maybe leaning more towards that management and need to lean more towards the leadership side. How would you help them to identify that?
When you're managing something, your highest objective tends to be to maintain the status quo. Okay, let's get a system in place so that we can process this thing every time and make sure it always happens the same way. And so procedures and processes and those kind of things are very valuable when it comes to management. But if you get stuck in the status quo, what happens is, again, there's no momentum to move forward. And here would be the thing to measure many times. It's how much tolerance do you have for change? Because tolerance for change, if you're leaning toward the management side, the last thing you want is change, okay?
That's good.
Because I have everything settled, okay? Like I've got all my processes and procedures in place. Don't change anything, okay? I've worked hard to get it here. Whereas a leader says, you know what? I'm not leading if I don't change something, okay? And so there's that balance and that tension. Again, it's not, as it's been said before, I believe Andy Stanley, if I remember correctly, it's not a problem to be solved. It's a tension to be managed, and we all can lean back and forth to those two areas from time to time.
And really, like you're saying, both of those are really important, but I think one of the things that's important to understand is that you manage processes, but you lead people.
Absolutely.
You don't manage people, right? No one wants to be managed. You manage processes and you lead people.
Yeah.
And so talk about the difference in those two, because again, both are valuable, but they also have their place.
I think of management in these terms. Management, when you're managing something well, it's kind of like, again, having a good system that's under the foundation, okay? So it's not something you even have to necessarily talk about all the time. It's just there. It's like when you go up to a building, you don't say, oh, that's an amazing foundation. No, you don't even see the foundation. What you see is you see the structure that's built, the superstructure that's above the ground. And so the management provides the foundation for the superstructure to be built, but the foundation is not the, you can't live without it. You can't have a building without it. But at the same time, it's not what you spend your time focusing on. You spend your time focusing on the mission, the vision, the superstructure, if you will, that you're building.
So, not all managers are leaders, but all leaders have to manage at some point. I think, we probably have to spend a little bit of time on both,
yes.
Right? How do you lean on one or the other, depending on what you're doing, what season you're in, what responsibilities you have?
Yeah, I think the management, I tend to think of management in terms of my resources, okay? So I don't so much lead my resources, I manage my resources, okay? So if I manage my resources well, I have the resources then to lead, okay? And resources are human resources, your people that are working with you, your team members, people that are around you that are helping support what you're doing and what you're helping support them do as well. So that's your team. And so you're managing those relationships and connecting with people well and making sure that everybody's on the same page in terms of that. Your resources include things like money, obviously, your finances. And so if you don't manage your finances well, you're not going to have the finances to do what you need to do. I think a lot of times we don't think in these terms of, I need to manage this well so I can then have something to lead. A lot of folks have a passion for leadership, but they don't manage their resources. And so their leadership is always frustrated because there's no resources to lead from, okay? So the more that if I effectively manage my resources, then it gives me, I'm trying to think of the word here, it gives me bandwidth might be to be able to lead effectively.
That's really good. I think maybe someone who's listening and they find themselves, or even from time to time, you can find yourself in a place where you feel like, I'm just managing. How do you make that turn and move from simply managing to becoming a better leader?
Yeah, management, generally speaking, again, it provides a level of resource for something, but leadership is really what causes growth or increase, okay? If you're a staff member on a church team, if you're managing, chances are you might have really good policies and procedures in place, but no growth necessarily is happening in people, okay? You're not increasing the number of people that are serving in your ministry. You're not increasing the number of people you're winning for Christ. Your metrics when it comes to people-related ministries are probably not changing a whole lot. Although you have a lot of great policies and procedures and everything may go smoothly, what you can tend to do is focus on that because that's more controllable than leadership, okay? Leadership is really hard to always nail down. Management's fairly easy. I can look and say, okay, I had $2 yesterday, I got $4 today. Looks like my money's going up, I'm managing it well, okay?
Yeah.
But leadership, how do you measure how somebody's growing in Christ? You can measure certain things like how many people came to Christ and how many people are connecting with your different areas of ministry and church and so forth. But generally speaking, this leadership is a bit more difficult to define and understand. And so I think we have a tendency to busy ourselves with things that we can more easily see than things that are a bit more harder to see in terms of leading people forward.
Fantastic. We're going to come back to that here in just a moment. But right now, let's take this short break. We'll come back to that same question here in just a moment. Well, as we talk about team building and development, Pastor Dale has developed a great resource called Living and Giving God's Dream. It's a book designed to train people for ministry use at your church. And if you would like a copy of that, you can purchase those on our website at upn2020.com/resources. That's upn2020.com/resources. It'll be a great guide as you look to train and equip the people that God is sending to your church. We've taken many volunteers from our church through that, and it's created an incredible culture among our team. So I encourage you to get that again. That's upn2020.com/resources. Now let's get back to the rest of our episode. We're back here with Pastor Dale talking about management and leadership. And Pastor Dale, you were talking about managing your resources well. And I think one of the things you've said in the past is what you manage well grows.
Yes,
right?
Exactly right. Yeah, anything you manage well and lead well will grow, okay? Leadership and management both should lead to growth. I think that's part of what happens with certain people when they get in a management position. They don't think of the responsibility associated with management for growth. But what you manage well grows well. If you manage your money well, it's going to grow. If you manage your health well, it's going to be increasing, or it certainly will be stabilized, will be positive for your future. Manage your marriage well, guess what? Your marriage is going to grow. And so that principle of management leads to growth, which provides resources for you to then accomplish the leadership, the changes, the forward momentum that you want in an organization, in a relationship.
That's great. One of the parables and teachings that you give our staff pretty consistently is the parable in Matthew 25, where he talks about the servants who had the talents. And one of those actually managed, right?
Right.
The other two actually managed and led.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
I love that parable. It is one of my favorites, and it's probably one of my go-tos here at our church because I think of all the different lessons that are there in that parable where Jesus described the guy that, the story, the master gave one servant 5 talents, the other 2, and the other one 1. And of course, the first 2, 5 and 2 multiplied theirs, doubled theirs. And then the last one, here's the thing, he managed his. He didn't lose anything. He still, when the master came back and said, give an account, Well, the 5 had 10, and the 2 had 4, and the 1 had 1. Okay, he had not lost anything. Okay, and I think that's vital to understand that when you manage things, you may not necessarily lose, but you haven't gained anything. You haven't moved anything forward. You haven't utilized the resources for accomplishing or moving something toward growth. And so you might recall in Matthew 25, the master said, "You wicked, lazy servant." Think about that. Pretty harsh,
Yeah.
strong words. You wicked,
Wow.
lazy servant. Can you imagine this guy in his head? Well, I
Yeah.
kept what you gave me. I
Yeah.
didn't lose it. Well, why do you think I'm wicked or lazy? Because he didn't manage in such a way that resulted in positive leadership and positive growth of what was given to him. And so if you're in a ministry position, responsibility, it actually works in any realm of life, that God is pro-growth, okay? It's extremely important to understand. Our God is a growth-oriented God. When he created the universe, he created it to have capacity to grow, okay? You look at the trees, everything that God created has growth capacity. And when something is healthy, there's going to be growth that'll be associated with it. And so management leans toward, again, the status quo. If you're not careful, you can get caught in just keeping what you got, not increasing it at all. But leadership added to good management results in growth.
Excellent. I know you talked, maybe you lean towards this a little bit, and we're talking a little bit about it, but maybe talking more about how do you, someone who is managing, and maybe they're even managing well, whether it's a volunteer or a staff member, how do you as a leader help them to come up to that level of now leading and not just managing?
Maybe you've heard the phrase before, they're too far down in the weeds, okay? And to be too far down in the weeds means that you're just down at this level of where you can't really see the vision anymore. You don't even know necessarily why you're doing what you're doing. You just kind of have a system and you go through it, and there's not a lot of vision associated sometimes with the person that's managing that way. And so part of what is necessary and part of what really comes with leadership is that ability to see vision, to know why we're doing what we're doing, and to be motivated by it, to another word that we could talk about at another time, be passionate about it, to say, we're not going to settle for where we are. And so someone that's stuck in a management situation that is now, maybe they're managing what they have well, they're not losing, but they're not necessarily winning.
Yeah.
They need really an impartation of vision. They need to know the why. And the why needs to get a hold of them. When a why gets a hold of you, the what starts working for you. I think a lot of times the reason we fall prey to that is because we just lose that vision.
I think for that team member, part of their responsibility is to lean into vision, to not just wait for it to be casted to them, but even to remind themselves of, here's why I'm doing this. And that's really good.
That's excellent. Yeah. And when I think about leadership, Pastor Dale, a lot of times it takes time to develop leadership because, as we've all heard, leadership is influence, and influence takes time. And that requires patience on our part, right, to gain that influence with the people that we're supposed to be leading. Can you speak to that? Because I think it's easy to get impatient and waiting for that influence or that leadership, right?
Yeah, it's really, again, it's that element is really managing, if you will, yourself, okay, and leading yourself. And leading yourself and managing yourself is the hardest thing you'll ever do. And that's learning to realize that I've got to build up the ability, the capacity. If I am going to be Jody's leader, then I can't effectively be Jody's leader if Jody doesn't respect me, okay? If Jody doesn't have a sense that I can help him move forward in my life. And so I'm not going to sit here and say, Jody, respect me. That's not leadership, okay? Leadership is now that over time I've shown to Jody that I love him enough, that I've developed enough, that I'm on a journey in my own life, and maybe I'm not 1,000 miles ahead of him, but maybe I'm a mile ahead of him, and that now I can pull him along because now he's seen, I've earned his trust, okay? And so good leaders and good managers earn the trust of those around them, and that takes time. You don't build that kind of trust necessarily quickly. It's something that has to be developed. It has to be something that you're aware of in the process.
So speaking more to that, like practically speaking, how do you earn the trust of those that you're leading and gain influence with them practically?
Yeah, the trust is an interesting thing because especially when it comes to ministry, we ought to have a basic trust, that we have in one another on a team, that we start with that process. If I don't trust you, I don't really need to be on your team, right? Okay. And so it starts with a sense of a person's integrity and the integrity of how they're living their lives and so forth. So there's a basic kind of trust that's there. But then also I'm going to trust a person more if I understand their expertise. So they're actually good at what they do, okay? And so if I can see, wow, that guy really knows what he's doing, I need to learn. That's a trust factor, okay? If I see them handle a situation well, okay, the more I see them handle something, the more I see wisdom come from them. Each of these things are things that allow me over time to earn trust, like putting it into an account. It's been said that a trust account builds slowly, but it can be drained quickly. And so we want to just make sure that we're doing the things that are moving us forward in growth that will allow other people to see that. And, again, there ought to be a basic respect and trust that we have in relationship with one another, but it grows over time by that influence, by that love, by that relationship, and by the expertise and wisdom that we demonstrate.
Even us, I think, being reliable as leaders, what gains the trust and the confidence of those who we're leading, right?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And that allows us to be effective as a manager and effective as a leader, because you can't effectively manage without the atmosphere of trust. You can't effectively lead, obviously, without the atmosphere of trust.
Pastor Dell, as we close out here on the topic of management and leadership, and maybe there's a young leader there, it's getting started in ministry. And with your experience that you have, is there something that you would speak into their life as they're kind of just getting started, the ropes of ministry and leadership and management? Any kind of final words that you would speak to them?
Always remember your why. Don't forget your why, okay? If you forget your why, then by that I mean why you're doing what you're doing, because that always gets you back on target. And, if nothing else, if you're a young leader, one of the great things you can do is just write a big old card put it on your desk or your computer, wherever you want to keep these kind of things, and say, this is why I do what I do, okay? And just write down the answer. I do this because of, and that why will always get you through every situation. It will answer the what's in your life because it keeps you focused on your purpose. And whether you are more effective at management or leading, either way, if you know your why, there'll be a vision. And without vision, people perish. But with vision, people flourish. When you have vision, you flourish.
Love that. Pastor Dell, thank you so much for your wisdom on management and leadership. And Jody, thank you as well for being here. And to the listeners, thanks for joining us for this episode of the Church Builder Podcast with Pastor Dale O'Shields. We look forward to seeing you next time on the podcast.